Welcome everyone to another planning period. I'm Wesley Glosson with Teach This Teacher, and we are about to do another planning session to give you the information before you dive into the standards with your students. This planning period is over SS8H3, The Road to Revolution in the Colony of Georgia. Got my sticky notes here, so let's get started. All right, so our first element in this standard really talks about what caused Britain to levy taxes on the colonies. And those taxes, we know, are later going to make the colonists revolt, part of what makes the colonists revolt. So one of the biggest reasons that the British government levied taxes on the colonies was because of the French and Indian War. You're going to maybe hook students into this lesson by asking them, how can animal pelts, how can fur cause a war, loss of life, and a second war? To kind of set up a discovery session for students to be curious and to broaden their interest. And you're going to tell them that the more Midwest, it's not quite the Midwest, but in the Ohio River Valley, the French were fighting for land rights. They were fighting for that territory with the British. So the French and the Indians allied together to fight the British, to run them out of that area, but the British did win. And that French and Indian War caused the British government to levy taxes on the American colonies because they wanted to pay for that very expensive war. Then, after they won that war and lost lives, like in every war, the British government, the Crown, decided to make the Proclamation of 1763. Students might not be familiar with the term proclamation, but they might be more familiar with the term executive order for a president, where he declares something. Also, break down the word proclamation in the root proclaim. So the Proclamation of 1763 really upset the colonists because they had just fought this war, and then the king, through this proclamation, said you cannot settle beyond this region, which was around the Appalachian Mountains. And this angered the British colonies because they were in a time that they wanted to expand. And so this proclamation saying you can't live here. Now, why did the king say that? Why did he tell them they couldn't live past that line, the line of 1763? Because he wanted to reduce the chance of war with the Indians, the Native Americans, again. So it's like getting in a fight, and even if you win the fight, you're like, no mas, no more. That's basically what he was trying to do. Some colonists were, most of them were very upset, and some ignored the proclamation. Georgians weren't too upset with this proclamation because they hadn't expanded out that far anyways. They were still over to the east coast of Georgia, and so it really didn't impact them as much. A third thing that's listed in the standard that you must go over, a part of the element, is the Stamp Act. And the Stamp Act, of course, was a tax on any paper goods, any paper products, anything made out of paper. And this made it very famous, the motto in the colonies, taxation without representation. To make this very current to students, I like to briefly, no longer than 5 minutes, ask them, why do they think that the District of Columbia would use that motto today? And I tell them, if you go to the District of Columbia, the Baltimore area, you will see on their license plate tags the motto, taxation without representation. And I like to see if students can make that connection. Of course, most of them will not in 8th grade. And so I tell them, because the District of Columbia is taxed like all over other Americans, but they don't have representation in Congress either, like a senator. They don't have 2 senators and so forth. And so just to make that connection with them, that those current day Americans are using that motto back from the Revolutionary War period. And so help them to understand what the representation part means. They are pretty familiar with taxes, even though you might want to ask them what is a tax and tell them why is it that you go to the store and that bag of chips is $1, but the cashier's is $1.06. So you're going to explain what taxes is very briefly. And then go into representation, that we pay taxes to a government where we can send representatives. So we live in the state of Georgia. We have 2 senators that we elected. We have representatives that we elected. And so it's a trade-off. Yes, we pay our taxes to this government, but this government represents our views through our votes. Well, the American colonists did not have representation in the British Parliament, yet they were being taxed by that government. And so these things, French and Indian War, Proclamation of 1763, the Stamp Act, caused Americans to get sick and tired of the British government and get ready to declare war, or their Declaration of Independence, which made war. You might want to go over the different types of protests they did, like speeches and written protests and letters in the newspaper, boycotts of British goods, and a group that formed that was very popular in this time was the Sons of Liberty. And the Sons of Liberty was a anti-British government group that formed, and they are responsible for many different protests. Students might be familiar with the Boston Tea Party. Briefly spent a little bit of time of that. That happened in Boston, so it's not a part of our Georgia standards. But these are things that might recall background knowledge to help them know what period of time that we're in. So that is pretty much all on element A. So let's move into element B. Element B is talking about a few documents or parts of the documents. So the Declaration of Independence, I always pause to break down those 2 words, Declaration, Independence. Students know what it means to declare. But when you say declaration, they don't make that connection. So help them make that connection. Declare, declaration. What are they declaring? Their independence. Because it's going to get very confusing when you start talking about all of these terms: Declaration of Independence, Preamble, Articles of Confederation, Constitution. And in students' mind, they're all old documents and they just blend together. So we're going to spend a little bit of time to say the Declaration of Independence did not establish a government. It simply declared that they would be independent from whom? From the crown, from Great Britain. So then you're going to break down, the standard requires you to break down the 3 main parts of the Declaration of Independence. We're going to break down preamble. Students are familiar with that prefix, before. Amble means to like walk or go through something. So this is the part that walks you through. It's the introduction, is what you're going to tell students. An introduction to the rest of the document. So the preamble, the goal of the preamble is to go before the main part, go before, and it basically states the reasons. So we hold these truths to be self-evident, that men are created equal, and then the grievances are going to tell how they feel like they are not being treated equal by the British government. And that's the second part. The grievances. Grievances such as they were aggrieved by the taxes, which we already covered in element A. They were aggrieved or angry about Quartering Act. The British Parliament had also signed a Quartering Act that said that you must house British soldiers at any time. You don't have a choice. If they knock on your door and say, we're spending the night here, you didn't have a choice. They were also aggrieved that they were being occupied by British soldiers at a time of peace. There was no war. So they're like, why are these soldiers marching our streets? They felt like they were being surveilled and oppressed. So you're going to go over these grievances. I usually don't add in products here, but I have a great material, a product that you'll find in the link that is a kid-friendly version of the Declaration of Independence that kids can read and understand all of this, the preamble and the grievances. And then the last part of the document that the standard had you go over is the actual declaration, where they basically just come right out and say, King George, we are no longer associating with you. These colonies are making their own nation, their own country, their own confederation, and we're done with you. And with that direct declaration of independence, they were basically also declaring war, because no king would usually just say, okay, we're cool with that, go ahead, because they were making money. Mercantilist economy was thriving off of the colonies. The next part of this element says that the students will know the signers of the Declaration of Independence from this colony of Georgia. Those three men are Button Gwinnett, Lyman Hall, and George Walton. Ask students, where do those names appear today? Hopefully they recognize Gwinnett County, a suburb of Atlanta, Hall County, where Gainesville is up in more northern Georgia, and Walton County, a exurb off of Atlanta, pretty far off from Atlanta, Walton County, Monroe, Georgia. So just have them understand, though, that when they signed that document, they were risking their lives. If they lost the war, they would be found by the British soldiers and hung for treason against the government. So that pretty much wraps up element B. On to element C. Element C talks about certain people and events in the Revolutionary War that are somewhat specific to Georgia. Of course, Loyalists and Patriots are not specific to Georgia. So basically, again, I have a wonderful poster that you can put up in your classroom, link in the description, that defines the difference between a Loyalist and a Patriot. And it's kind of confusing for students because Loyalist could mean loyal to your home, your colonies, but help them to understand that these men were originally from Great Britain. So they were loyal to Great Britain. They were loyal to their original government, the crown, the parliament of Great Britain. And of course, a patriot is the opposite, who was for American independence. Then you're going to talk about also the reasons that people were loyal or patriots. The Loyalists, first of all, did not want to fight a war and die. They thought it was treason against the government, and they thought it was very unpatriotic, to borrow a phrase, to withstand the government. Also, a lot of them had economic ties, and that is the reason that Georgia had more Loyalists than Patriots. Georgia was a more loyal colony because of their economic ties to Great Britain. They didn't think that they could fare well economically without Great Britain. On the other hand, Patriots felt that, again, the government was oppressing them, as we've already covered in elements A and B, and they thought that they should have a freer, fairer country for certain people if they were to break away from the oppression, what they felt like, of the British government. So then you're going to talk about two events, the Battle of Kettle Creek. This is a battle that happened in Georgia where the Patriots were successful, and though they were outnumbered, led by Elijah Clark and Thomas Dooley, they defeated a very large battalion of redcoats of the British Army. And this, of course, raised morale, but it also replenished supplies that the Patriots needed down in the southern theater of this war down in the South, with horses and that kind of thing. Also, unfortunately, and this is my opinion, the Standards took out a very instrumental player, Austin Dabney, because he was a enslaved person, a black person who helped win this war, and he came out as an American hero. The Standards wiped him out, and I want you to spend a little bit of time to tell them, maybe find a picture, if there is one, I'm not sure, of Austin Dabney, a black hero in the American Revolution, because I believe too often we portray many of our wars as just white American heroes, such as George Washington and General Patton all the way up into World War II. But we need to take time to recognize that even the first person killed in the Revolutionary War was a black person in the Boston Massacre. a former slave, so enslaved person. So please take a little time to research Austin Dabney and maybe mention him. The Siege of Savannah was a Patriot loss. The Loyalists, the Redcoats, were successful in beating back a Patriot attack. Remember, Savannah was already under the control of Britain. So the Siege of Savannah is a loss for the Patriots when they tried to retake Savannah, a very important port city where they could have gotten a lot of help had they been able to control the city of Savannah. But it was a loss. But that was a major battle in the Revolutionary War taking place in Georgia. And that pretty much wraps up element C. So we'll move on to our last element, element D. Okay, so element D is all about what happened after the Revolutionary War was won by the colonies. Understand this was a great, tremendous victory. No one would think that these militiamen could overcome the strongest fighting force on the planet at the time, the British Army Empire. And so what do? They need to form a government. And the first government is formed around an article or a constitution called the Articles of Confederation. Back in my day, about 10 years ago, when I first started teaching social studies in Georgia, students would know what a confederation is coming into 8th grade because it was part of the government structure that they studied in 6th and 7th grade. They studied a confederation. That is now taken out of the standard, so students will not know what a confederation is. So to briefly teach this, I'll try to remember to put the link in the video. You can show them a clip of Avengers Assemble. Show them all the Avengers coming together when they, Avengers Assemble, because that's what a confederation is. Each state makes their own laws, lives their own lives, have their own government until wartime, and then you come together. And that's the kind of government that the colonies wanted at first. Ask students why they would want to call a government like that. Why would they want a government that didn't have a strong central force, a strong federal government? And of course, the answer is because they just came out of what they felt like was tyranny. When you give too much power to a central government, you'll get tyranny. And so they decide to have a very weak federal government and give power to each individual states to make their rules. So the things that they could do under the Articles of Confederation was declare war, coin money, and post offices. So that's a pretty weak authority that you give. We're going to let you make post offices, right? So what they could not do, and the reason that Articles of Confederation did not work was because it did not let the government levy taxes. And taxes, of course, are needed to pay for the war that you might declare. So if you need to protect yourself against, Spain or France or Great Britain might come back, then how are you going to pay for that war if you can't levy taxes? Every vote basically had to be unanimous between all the states. And we know how hard it is to get consensus and unanimity on anything. So that made the government very weak. And trade. Every state could make their own trade policy. So what if it was in the advantage to put a tariff on Spain or France or whoever, but one state decided we're not going to put a tariff on them? Then that would weaken your bargaining power, it will weaken you as a country. And so those are some of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Then we're going to move to the United States Constitution, which we are still under today. And this is when lots of disagreement came because we're going to have a strong federal government. How are the states going to maintain their autonomy? And so a lot of disagreements happened. The 3/5 Compromise, which was supported by Abraham Baldwin, which was our representative from Georgia to the Constitutional Convention, he supported the 3/5 Compromise. And it stated that enslaved people would count as 3/5 in the population total. Why would the southern states that had many, many slaves, more than the northern states, want enslaved people to count in the population? Not because they want to give them power, mind you, the enslaved people, but because that would give them an advantage in the population count, so they would have more representation in Congress. So the northern states would not agree to count these enslaved people as a full person in the tally, because these people didn't have a voice in the government. The southern states were enslaving them. They were enslaved, so they didn't have a voice. So they're like, why should we count them in the tally? And so this is the 3/5 compromise, which decreased conflict at the time, but led to conflict in the Civil War. You might want to go ahead and mention that to students, that this is going to come up again, and it's actually going to cause conflict because of the agreed northern states with this 3/5 compromise. William Few also was a signer from Georgia. So we have Abraham Baldwin and William Few. Have students to maybe ask students if they have a relative that ever went to ABAC. It's often known to, because I try to generate any background knowledge and let them know that ABAC, a agricultural college in Tifton, Georgia, stands for Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College, ABAC. So that might be something that helps them remember. ABAC College, Abraham Baldwin, signer of the U.S. Constitution from the state of Georgia. And friends, I think that also is the summarization of element D. So I hope you got so much from this planning session, this planning period together. Please check out the links below. I have a mini lecture that you can go over in just one day with your students. It really gives a great background knowledge, and then you can spend the next few days digging deeper with your textbook or other materials. I have lots of different resources that are highly engaging in the links below. Thank you, and I hope to see you on the next planning period. This is, again, Wesley Lawson with Teach This Teacher. See you later, everyone.